Well, good morning, everybody. I wanted to start off today by looking at the last 7 days of total accumulated precipitation and just do a quick review of the weather systems we saw to help put into better perspective what we're about to watch for the next 15, maybe 30 days. Of course, the main story was Helene, which came through Florida at Category 4 strength intensity, quickly moved through parts of the Carolinas, Georgia, hit this part of Tennessee, made a quick turn through the Mid-South, and is moving toward the Mid-Atlantic later on today. Remember, before that, we had a low that left California that came into the southern plains, which is what helped to spark off some of the storms that were here and carry some of that moisture into parts of the Midwest. We also saw really much needed precipitation in parts of the Northeast as well. Outside of that, very, very dry except for parts of the Pacific Northwest, which continue to get better flow around those deep lows that are in the Gulf of Alaska. But as we take a look at some of the rainfall totals focusing on the southeast, we have several places here that easily eclipse 10 inches, and places along the Blue Ridge Mountains, this part of the Smokies, the southern tail of the Appalachian Mountains here, grabbing some places up to 18 inches of total rainfall. And an incredible amount of precipitation came out of Helene, and it was the trajectory, the Fujiwara effect, all of those things we talked about for the last couple of weeks that really brought this together, and I just wanted you to see the end result of this. Now from here, let's go have a look at rivers that are in flood stage. So this again is just water.noaa.gov, a fantastic resource. It puts together all of the USGS river gauges, and we can again see those that are in minor, major, and moderate flooding, which would be in between, of course. And there's just so many rivers throughout parts of the parts of the southeast up to the mid-Atlantic right now that continue to flood. And if you've paid attention to this in the news or on social media over the weekend, some of the flooding videos, the flash floods, the landslides have just been horrific to watch. But this is what it's looked like. To put it into some kind of different terms here, I want to show you the last 7 days as a percent of normal. So this is a national map. And again, it just highlights there's huge sections of the country that have not measured precipitation, not just in the last week, but many in the last month or more. But some of the rainfall totals down here in the southeast, if we focus in on this area, this is for a week, a week's time frame here. They're up to, 1,000 times normal. So it's just incredible to see that the amount of flooding. Now remember, we saw extremely strong winds that came around this that hit parts of Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, southern Indiana, and southern Illinois. There was some very strong winds. We had large branches down, for example, in my yard. I'm way up here in Champaign County. But I just want you again to see the rainfall totals. But now that Helene is on its way out and is decayed and is now wrapped up into that other low that came out of the Midwest, I want to put some emphasis back on the very dry conditions, because over the last 30 days, pockets of the Columbia Basin, the Southwest, large sections here of the northern plains, sections of the southern plains, all the way down to Texas, even with the rains that came in last week into New England, still very dry in parts of the Northeast. And these drought areas continue to grow as we go forward in this forecast. We're about to flip the script on this discussion about too much water in some places, like with Helene, to now getting back to this risk of major drought development as we go forward. Because over the month of September, there is just a large area in the north central part of the United States that's having one of its driest Septembers on record. And even some of the weather conditions we've seen coming out of Montana into North Dakota, some of that was way early in the month, biasing the statistics a little bit toward the average side. Since then, it's been extremely dry. And tomorrow I'm heading up to Fargo. I'm quite anxious to see the conditions of the Red River of the North and just kind of fly over this area just to get a good look at what's going on in the northern plains. And I've got some mixed reviews on this. I've had some folks say the crop finished. I was able to get harvest going fast. The risk of fire is high, but that's been a big discussion. And remember, this area, because of the extremely late plant, needed some late season heat to get the crop to finish. And so just to continue a discussion in this area, I want you to see this is what the temperature ranks have looked like for the month of September so far. So that's a lot of single digits there, stretching from, parts of the Columbia Basin through Montana into the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Extremely warm month so far, despite actually having a couple of intrusions of cold air. Now, this whole area is under frost risk, but yesterday we had temperatures here in the western Dakotas, parts of Montana, even parts of Wyoming that were deep into the 90s, so extremely hot, but the temperature is about to fluctuate quite rapidly across this part of the country. So given those statistics, let's go ahead and have a look at a couple of other things. This would be for the last 30 days, cumulative downward solar flux. So in other words, we're looking at how much of the sun's light gets down to the surface compared to average. And while the cloud cover here mostly dominated for the last week by Helene, is what's keeping this area in deficit, we've got large areas of the upper Midwest, the plains, parts of the Pacific Northwest, and sections of the Southwest that have been much less cloudy. Same thing for the Canadian prairie. So it's just kind of an interesting metric to monitor. Just kind of gives us an idea of what the sunshines look like. But I want to bring this all down to a discussion of soil moisture, because throughout the Missouri Basin, a large section here of the northern and central plains, big sections of the Midwest, upper Midwest, Great Lakes states, the soil moisture deficits are still very large. And although Helene's rain came through and helped to revive a little bit on the Mississippi River, for example, this morning, it is only 1/10 of a foot below low stage. After, remember, when we started this discussion, it was 10 feet below low stage. So this is a pretty remarkable recovery given the recent rainfall that got into that river. But what I'm concerned about is just how dry the Missouri Basin is, the upper Mississippi and the northern side of the Ohio River Basin, still showing, extremely low soil moisture amounts. And that's going to be a concern unless we somehow see this corrected in fall. But I don't think October is going to put a dent in this right now. And I'm going to make that case for you here in a few moments. All right, next 14 days, just a quick idea here on this. You can imagine what the jet stream's doing. It's not in the U.S. It's somewhere coming into British Columbia, leaving through Canada, and we're expecting a lot of ridging of high pressure in this area. And as a result, the 14-day forecast is very dry. In fact, some of the model runs I was watching on Sunday didn't put down any. No, they had zeros for the next 14 to 15 days in the midsection of the country for total precipitation. We do have to watch one thing coming out of the tropics. If you remember last week when we were in the middle of discussing Helene, we saw that some of the weather forecast models were attempting to produce another system somewhere down here in Central America, the Caribbean, or the Bay of Campeche. But before I go any farther with this, I just want to show you. You see Tropical Depression 12, Joyce, and Isaac. They are all moving around where the Bermuda High is currently sitting, which is here, which is actually shoving a lot of this over toward parts of Western Europe, especially into Great Britain, and this has been an area that's seen a lot of flooding because of this lately. Now, I haven't covered it because I just tend to focus on big agricultural areas, mainly in North and South America in these videos, but it's been the Bermuda High that's helped to shove a lot of that momentum and moisture into this part of Western Europe. But coming back to our hurricane map, let's flip this over to a 7-day forecast, because what I'm concerned about is that there's a 50% chance of development of another system in that region very close to where Helene originated. We can see that in the European model. Just take a look. This is the probability of getting a tropical depression to form, that throughout this week we're going to have to keep a close eye again back toward the Yucatan Peninsula for deeper convection that could take shape and become another tropical system. The thing that'll be different this week is that we'll have a large blocking high pressure center here. And as a result, if something forms in this area, the chances of it going toward Florida are much higher than having it come toward the north. There's no troughs digging through here anytime soon to make that a possibility. But I do want to show you, this is what we've got from the latest of our forecast models, this is just the European model, looking out at the next 10 days of tropical low pressure system tracks. So you kind of see two different regimes here. The Bermuda High there, the system's curling around the Bermuda High. And then you have whatever develops down here midweek this week to later this week that could eventually impact. I think it's more of an impact on the Florida coast than anything. And I honestly don't have, forgive me here, I honestly don't have a lot of supporting evidence just yet as to how and when this can develop. So we will talk about this each morning this week and try to figure out what's going on here. So from there, let's just open this up to a bigger picture study of the atmosphere. And this is what we talked about a lot last week. In fact, we've talked about it for a lot for the last 3 weeks. It feels as though the Bering Sea, which is here, is dictating these troughs that are diving into the Gulf of Alaska. And this over the next 15 days is where we most often see ridging. Now, because of troughs diving into this area, we tend to get a reflection of that here as well, because the whole pattern is set up with this kind of daisy chain of troughs. See them? And in between, there are some large ridges like this one here, the one that's over Greenland, and the one that's over the central and western United States. Now, as we just think about what's dominating that pattern, I still think it has everything to do with the West Pacific Oscillation and the fact that the MJO reset over here to phase 1. And as it reset in that area, this is a common common height pattern during that time frame. So what we need to be paying attention to here is how long this lasts. Is it something we deal with for all of October, or is it something we just see maybe for the first couple of weeks of October? October being a transition month, quickly losing daylight hours, we do see quite a bit of change in the radiative balance across the northern hemisphere as this happens. So we can see very quick shifts. I just want you to be aware of that. So here we go. This is sunrise early this morning. The cloud field here is what's left of Helene. Oh, that's really neat. I think in the northeast. You mind if I just zoom in on that real quick? Let's go to the northeast. Yeah, look at all of the valley fog in the northeast this morning. That's got to be amazing. I hope someone gets some good pictures over the top of this. Beautiful view of some of that valley fog. But let's go back to the view here of the rest of the country. I'm going to take you back to yesterday. Because as we watched the broader trough, which is now completely taken over Helene, sit and spin over Tennessee and Kentucky, my focus went actually back to the west, a couple of very large fires here. In fact, if we zoom in, I want you to see these. The one in Wyoming has already prompted a mass evacuation downwind of this, put out some smoke over North Dakota. There's another fire here in the Columbia Basin, right in that area, some in parts of Idaho, and a few fires in Oregon as well. I see one down here in California too. So the winds behind this system that's coming through, that's going to drop the temperatures and also drop the moisture levels, is quite fierce. And that's why we've got a broad area that's under red flag warnings here today. So this is wind advisories, red flag warnings, And on the back side of this, we've got very cold air. So this is a large area that has a freeze watch and a freeze warning, and a frost warning right down through this area as well. So this is going to be a quick and rapid transition in temperatures after what you saw this weekend in this area. We still have all of the flooding issues here, which is what you see in each of these polygons, and also here in the broader area where the flood watch still exists. And dense fog here, a couple of air quality alerts down in Texas, excessive heat warnings that are in parts of the southwest, and heat advisories that roll up the coast. This is wind, right? I struggle sometimes with my own colors here. Let's do this. Forgive me. I want to go to weather.gov. And let's click there and look, because I haven't set up that functionality. Oh, heat advisory. I'm so sorry. So that's a heat advisory that is along the, along the California coast. Okay, let's come back to the discussion on wind. Midday winds. Front is clearing, very dry air behind it, much colder. You're going to start up with a southerly wind ahead of this front, quickly replaced by a westerly wind. Strong winds off the coast as well. And if you want to see how fast these winds are going to be, this is the forecast just through the beginning of this week. So playing this out through, Wednesday evening, we're going to see gusts today. This is all mostly today in the 40 to 50 mile an hour range, maybe even stronger than that. And you can see much stronger coming off the mountains, as we talked about last week. Continuing this forecast out, let's just play this all the way out through the next week or so. There's another front sneaking through here. And you can start to see that. See it kind of showing up with the color on the back side. That's going to give you another round of wind late this week and into early next week. And by the time we get out to early next week, we'll be having a discussion about something coming out of the tropics. Now, because of that, we're going to be pushing a lot of that. I don't know why that's bouncing. But we're going to be pushing a lot of that wildfire smoke. Let's get this back to the beginning. There we go. We're going to push a lot of that wildfire smoke. I do not know why that's flashing. But anyways, from these larger fires from the northwest along that frontal boundary. So let's go and have a quick look at what's going on our radar this morning. And let's get an update here. We can see that low is trying to put down some precip in the Canadian Prairie, but not a lot of this is getting to the ground early this morning here in Montana and over the Dakotas. The moisture you see here is just the remnants of Helene from late last night into early this morning. Our high-res modeling coming from the NAM here. Let's get a quick refresh on this. There we go. This is what we're expecting. Not much. This is Helene. That's why we still have the risk of some flooding areas over here, the leftovers of Helene. But that frontal boundary clears very quickly by tonight. It's already here by 3 a.m. on Tuesday. So it's going from there to there. I'm not even sure you could drive that distance in this amount of time. But it's going to be sweeping through the upper Midwest. There's another low that follows it that goes along the Canadian border, but not much precip. By the end of this animation, we're seeing the northern side of some of the convection in the Bay of Campeche coming out into the Gulf of Mexico. All right, so where does all of this lead? It leads to these maps. This is, just take a look at it, 7 forecast models, European, artificial intelligence, GFS. We then have the WPC and the national blend. And the reality of it is if you just want to get a good look at this, let's just open the single image. Next 7 days of total precip, this is what we've got. And there's not much coming. You already saw this at the beginning when we were concerned about the ridge that's going to be in place. So leftover of Helene, systems kind of running here, and a tropical event. Now that could be, huge amounts of rains right along the Gulf Coast into Florida. But outside of that, the broad section of the United States expecting nothing. Again, the pattern is this. Let's just refresh here. Just watch where the troughs are going. They're coming out of the Gulf of Alaska, rolling through Canada, going toward, the Hudson Bay, leaving just most of the United States out of the wake of any sort of good flow. By the time we get into late this weekend, where's our next source region? Here, sending troughs there. And they just come into British Columbia, skirt along the U.S.-Canada border, come over to the northeast, the eastern Canadian Maritimes, and we're already out to next Tuesday. Another trough. And the pattern seems to be amplifying itself kind of on the corners of the U.S. So here and at times there. And we just need to see what that tends to do overall to our total precipitation and also, what it does to temperatures. So as you can tell from all 4 of our modeling systems here, we're not looking at much even into next week. All that I could say is that we need to keep an eye on whatever comes out of, the Yucatan Peninsula into the Gulf, possibly hitting Florida. And as we develop deeper troughs here, we could increase rainfall amounts in the Northeast. But if you're in the central U.S., the whole of the central U.S. and the Canadian Prairie in the West, I'm not looking at much at all in terms of total precipitation. So let's have a discussion about these temperatures. I keep talking about how dry the air is behind this front. So this is by tonight. That's where the front is. This is a dew point temperature map. We've got dew point temperatures in the teens and single digits behind this. This is extremely dry air. And it's going to quickly race through the Midwest, through the Central Plains, making it all the way to the Appalachian Mountains here. By Wednesday, still very, very dry air in place. And what I don't see in this forecast is much of a recovery of moisture outside of this area. You can see the dew points stay relatively high here, maybe a little bit higher in this area, but we're not able to squeeze. There's no lift. There's no trigger. We can't do anything with this to make rainfall out of it. So as a result, when the next front comes through, this upcoming weekend, early next week, we just drop it back down again and replace all of that moist air with another shot at very dry air. With drier air on the backside of these fronts, where you have lighter winds and you finally get yourself into higher pressure, we start to just develop this risk of frost. And we just have a quick look at that. This is where I've got frost in the next 7 days. So now we see it's parts of Nebraska, Wyoming, western side of South Dakota, most of North Dakota, save this southeast corner. You see the northern tier of Minnesota, Wisconsin, the UP, patchy here in parts of Maine, but most of the Northwest that has, that at this time of year can get frost are going to get it. And it's just some much colder air coming in. So this was this morning's low temperatures, very cold throughout parts of the Pacific Northwest. This is the heat that was over this part of the northern plains yesterday. It's starting to move over the upper Midwest. There's the cool air, much colder air coming in tomorrow. This is our frost event getting all the way down into parts of Nebraska. You'll see that cold air sliding behind the front right here into parts of the Missouri, Mississippi, Ohio Valley by Wednesday. Really cold morning there. That's Thursday morning. Friday, that's the next push of cold air coming through. So this is your second frost event later in the week. And then we get into Saturday and Sunday. And we start talking about high temperatures, right? So here's today's high temperatures getting into tomorrow on Tuesday. Look at the heat coming back into the west here. Then watch, we go right back over to really, really hot conditions. So we're looking at like 30-degree daily swings in temperature here in the central part of the United States. That's Thursday, getting into Friday, Saturday. So Thursday highs struggling to get out of the 50s. Friday, Saturday, we're back up into the 70s and 80s, maybe 90s down here in Nebraska. So frost tomorrow morning, and then we could see 90-degree temperatures in this part of Nebraska again by the end of the week. Okay, what about it's kind of stretching this out. Day 0 through 5, 5 through 10, 10 through 15. We see a lot of heat in the west, and this just tells you what this pattern is doing. Lows coming in here, ridging opening up like this. So the temperature pattern fluctuates on the periphery of the ridge, But if you're kind of anchored in the Great Basin, I expect it to stay warm for a while. So let's finish this up by talking about some longer term weather. CPC updated their week 3, week 4 forecast, which is the middle 2 weeks of October. And this makes a ton of sense comparing it to what we talked about last week. This is this positive West Pacific oscillation, MJO phase 1, and La Niña trio trying to keep the pattern looking something like this, coming in and around and over with a ridge of high pressure sitting in this area. So there's the heat and there's the dryness. Florida, we could still be dealing with more tropical moisture. The Northwest, you dip these troughs in, you end up getting better chances of precip. So this makes a ton of sense to me. European model, its dry forecast for October just got drier. And this kind of builds on the story we started at the end or beginning of this video, We've got too much flow coming from the Bering Sea into British Columbia and not dipping down to get through that larger ridge that's in place here. And I think we may see the front half of October looking like this, and there's the risk that it doesn't break down even mid-October. Now, if it does, of course, we'll talk about it. But what this just did was make the forecast so much drier in places in the central United States, which is going to knock out or negate some of the effects of the increase in moisture we just got from Helene. So that's your October outlook on the precipitation side of things. In about 5 days' time, 6 days' time, we're going to get a new update on the seasonal forecast, and La Niña is going to be a big part of that. And as you look, the ocean temperatures don't look, this solid blue, which would indicate really strong trade winds. But I think we're about to get another trade wind, easterly wind burst. That's what we call it. And you see the blues in through here would represent stronger winds coming in this direction soon. So La Niña is going to keep kind of coming and going in surges until we get ourselves fully into late fall and winter, when it will likely have its biggest impacts. So we're going to keep updating that longer range picture as we go forward throughout this week. All right, where I want to finish today is I want to talk about some global weather. Just to give you a quick idea on your next 10 days looking at average temperature anomalies. And let's compare this to our precip anomalies. So Bermuda High sitting right in here, flow coming around it going straight into Europe. We're still drier across a broad section of Russia here. The MJO has reset. It's kind of sitting right over in this area in phase 1, but we're watching for some tropical moisture in the middle of the Indian Ocean, which could start to bias what the MJO's true position looks like. We're still wet in Western Australia as well. And while eastern side of Australia is drier, this area of Western Australia is trying to break. It started to do this about a month and a half ago, but there was about a 9-month-long drought that hit Western Australia. But take a look at South America, very wet in southern Brazil, now into parts of Argentina. And if we look back over the last 30 days, the drought that has been, the summer dry period, I should say, carried into a spring drought that's in the midsection of Brazil here. And their cumulative solar downward flux, okay, this is how much sunlight's getting to the ground, has been very high, making their evaporation rates even higher. So if you look back from late June to late September, we do have several places here in Mato Grosso, getting over toward Goiás, Tocantins, several places here that are having their driest 3 months on record. And if you just kind of look up, it's been dry for the last 2 months and dry in these pockets for the last month. Very, very dry. And this is part of the reason that in Mato Grosso, we've almost made no planting progress. They're 0.5% planted. Last year, they were at 4.2%. The average is about 2.8. And they're waiting on rains to come in. And over the next 10 days, the wettest conditions are down here in Santa Catarina, Rio Grande do Sul, along the Paraná River Basin, getting into northern Argentina. Take note, though, Buenos Aires, getting over toward Cordoba is dry, which is about right there. But north of that, it's looking to be extremely wet. Some of the longer models are trying to bring in something, scattered storms that could come into this area, which could start to get the planting ideas going. But like you would expect, the European model flipped back over wet again for looking at the whole month of October in this area. So it just went wetter. We watched it flip-flop all week last week. Will the monsoonal rains come in this month of October? If they don't, we're going to see major delays in the planting. If they do, they're going to make up lost time quickly. I would not be surprised if all of a sudden, if it rains in these couple of weeks here, that this line goes like this. It's done it in the past, and I think it's something that could happen again now. If it doesn't, we will stay on a lower trajectory for the remainder of the planting season. But these next 3 weeks, I think, are most critical for the start of the planting in Brazil's center-west growing areas, which includes Mato Grosso. Okay, that is all that I've got this morning. We'll just pick this up again tomorrow. I appreciate your attention. Thanks.